What's going on YouTube? So today I'm going to be talking about how the education system has traumatized you, possibly, if you're anything like me. Because, when dealing with negative emotions, a lot of times the main ones people are going to talk about when it comes to trauma is like shame and guilt. And I had great parents growing up. I didn't have a lot of shame and guilt for being who I was. They allowed me to be who I was. They loved me for who I was. Unconditional love, right? The negative emotion that I dealt with the most was boredom. And to this day, when it leads to things involving addiction and escapism for me, it's largely related to boredom. It's not really related to shame and trauma and trying to escape, that shame. I never dealt with a lot of that, but the secret emotion that a lot of us, I think, negative emotion that we're running from is boredom. And you think of it, you were basically domesticated and no emphasis was put on play. There was recess and whatever, but I got in trouble my whole life for wanting to socialize, for wanting to make people laugh, for disrupting the class. And so what did I learn to do? I couldn't escape that situation physically. So the only way of coping with it was to shut down mentally, to dissociate. And I spent a lot of my time in school, I think all my time in school, as far as I can remember, especially in elementary school, was spent just dissociated, was spent daydreaming. Because I was never engaged with anything we were doing. All I wanted to do was talk and socialize with my peers, but that was what we weren't allowed to do. If there was more of an emphasis put on that first, and then we started to learn things later in the day after we've gotten that out of our system, or later in the years that you go on in school, I think I would have been a lot more okay with that. But yeah, that was the starting of my basically escapism and addiction. Was school, being told to just sit down and do nothing. And so it's only now that I'm starting to really come to terms with that and realize that because I always thought what, I never had a lot of shame, I never had a lot of guilt. I always felt pretty okay with myself in those ways. But boredom is like the number one thing that drives me to use substances, mainly weed. That sounds crazy when I say substances. But mainly weed. And you might feel similar. You might have a similar experience in your life. And the only way to really deal with that is to, one, learn to accept boredom. So you learn to sit there and realize that you don't have to always be running from boredom. Within boredom, there's actually also is where peace is found. As much as it's fun to do things to escape boredom, it also becomes exhausting and taxing when it's a necessity instead of something you're just doing for the enjoyment of things and to make your life meaningful and fulfilled. So learn how to sit with boredom a little bit more. But the other thing is using that in constructive ways, right? Weed is not a constructive way to use it. Playing video games is not a constructive way to utilize that negative emotion. But doing something like this, YouTube videos where I'm trying to relate to people and hopefully sympathize with people and make you feel a little bit better about your situation, that's a little more positive. And doing music has always been a positive one. So I just think of all the shit teachers I had growing up who were people with power things, I think, weird power issues. And they, out of this control of these kids, and just make them follow rules at all times for no particular reason. And I hated it. So the only thing I could do was dissociate. And it's not a healthy thing. That taught me to not live in my body fully and not accept my emotions and not experience my emotions fully. And I'm now coming to terms with that and learning that the best thing I can do is sit there with that and not always be running from it. So that's what allows you to have a full, meaningful experience as a human being, happiness doesn't come from being positive all the time. I think happiness comes from, and it's not even really happiness as much as it's like fulfillment and satisfaction and meaning with your life that you should be more going for. But I think it comes often out of struggle. It comes often out of suffering and out of negative emotions. It's like, what are you willing to struggle for? And that comes down to your values. What do you value? Do you value getting high all the time? Or is it just something that you're kind of instinctually doing to escape? I value creativity and I value exploration. I think those are two things that I really value, and you can't fully express yourself if you're not fully yourself and you're not actually feeling all of those emotions. And you can't explore if you haven't explored your inner world enough, and you haven't explored yourself, and you don't know yourself. So I value those things more than dissociating and escaping my emotions and feeling, euphoria and dopamine all the time, and feeling that pleasure all the time. It's a really empty pursuit, and when you start to pursue those other things, pleasure kind of just comes along with it. And doing things just for the pursuit of pleasure is like not, look at like a heroin addict, that's like the ultimate, pursuing just pleasure itself. And that's not a very happy life. It's not a very fulfilled life. So, hopefully they can start changing things a little bit more in the education system to be a little more conducive to actually making us healthy, functional people. Anyways, I think that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Peace out.